365 Amplified for Friday, November 1st. Can you believe it? It is November. It is very easy to believe, in fact, that it is November after having walked around the neighborhood trick-or-treating last night and no longer being able to feel my fingers. It's just me for today. We're going to have Omar's going to join us in a little bit, and then we're going to talk with Dr. Joe Gothard, the superintendent of Madison schools. Rodlin is still on assignment, working on other big things, and Steph has the day off. This is kind of the week off, honestly, after pulling off an amazing 365 Leadership Summit. If you don't know, the Leadership Summit happens every fall. This is our 7th annual one, and Stephanie has produced basically every one. And so it's a very stressful time of year for her. And once we get through the summit, she puts her feet up for a few days, and that is well deserved. So I'm just going to talk about a few things here in the news. It's obviously election is the big thing right now. And a couple of things we'll note here. Obviously, it's Tuesday is election day. You can early vote right now. In Fitchburg, or rather Fitchburg / South Madison, on Saturday, tomorrow, if you're listening to this on Friday, Alder Joe Maldonado and DJ Terrence J are hosting a South Madison Get Out the Vote party. On the south side of Madison, there are a whole bunch of early voting locations. The Goodman Library, Monroe Street Library, Centro Hispano, Freedom Inc., the Madison College South Campus, Catholic Multicultural Center, the Allied Drive Boys and Girls Club, Fountain Life Church, and Badger Rock Neighborhood Center, all places you can go right now to vote early. So folks, are feeling that South Madison is the most diverse part of town, and it's a part of town that's undergoing a revitalization right now. So to get that population out to vote is really important for Alder Maldonado and others. So that is happening Saturday at Villager Mall out in the parking lot. So it's going to be outdoors, but it's music, food, all sorts of fun, and a lot of information and resources to help you cast your ballot between now and Tuesday. Speaking of making it easy to cast your ballot, the Urban League is joining the National Urban League and several other partners to give you free rides to the polls. Right? Transportation can be an issue, like just actually getting to the place to vote can be difficult for folks. So the Urban League is offering those rides. And they're also offering to drive folks around to canvass if you want to help knock on doors and encourage your neighbors to vote as well. There's a link. We'll put it in the show notes. It's also at Madison365.org, a link to sign up for a ride if you need one. If you need a ride to the polls, it's a couple of clicks. You give them your information, and they will come pick you up and drive you to the vote and drive you home. And again, that information is at Madison365.org. Obviously, our big thing has always been vote in those local elections. We're going to talk about the referendums, the school referendums coming up with Dr. Joe Gothard. But there's also assembly races, state senate, Congress. There's a United States Senate race, and then the presidential race, which is the one everybody's talking about all the time, of course. The new Marquette Law School poll, just out on Wednesday, shows basically a tie. It's within the margin of error. It's 50-49 in favor of Harris among likely voters. Kamala Harris leads 50-49, which means basically a tie. When you have like a 2.5 percentage point margin of error, it could be like 53-47. Either way, could be 53-47 Harris, could be 52-48 Trump. So it's hard to say. It's basically a toss-up right now. Early voting in person, and people who say they're going to vote on the day, on Tuesday, narrowly favors Donald Trump. According to this survey, people who have already early voted in person or who intend to vote on Tuesday have a slight advantage Trump has a slight advantage among that population, according to this poll in Wisconsin. Of those who mailed in their ballots, 70-30 to Kamala Harris. 70% of people who mailed in their ballots, according to the survey, the people who mailed in their ballots and answered the phone for the survey, right? 70% of them voted for Kamala Harris. When you introduce third-party candidates, Harris still leads by a little bit more. She has 46% of the vote to 44%, and 5% goes to Robert Kennedy Jr. And then the other couple of percent go to a variety of other candidates: Jill Stein, Chase Oliver from the Libertarian Party, Cornel West, etc. So what all that means is it's a toss-up. Whoever you want to win, your vote could really impact the result. So please do get out and do that. And as the campaign, I was going to say winds down, but it doesn't feel like it's winding down, as it sort of pushes through the finish line in the next few days. Both candidates are kind of barnstorming the swing states, which includes Wisconsin. I don't know if it's luckily, fortunately, includes Wisconsin or not, but both were in Wisconsin this past week. Both are in Milwaukee today, Friday, and there was a rally, a get out the vote rally on Wednesday, and Omar Waheed was there. And Omar's going to jump in here and tell us about that rally. Omar, you were at the Alliant Energy Center Wednesday night, right?
Yep, Wednesday night. Yeah, Kamala came. Very likely her last time in Madison in her campaigning efforts, but she will be back in Wisconsin Friday.
Yes, she'll be in Friday in Milwaukee, right?
Yep.
And it sounds like it was a decent crowd at the Alliant Energy Center, 13,000, something like
that. Over 13,000. I think that's about 2,500 more than last time she was at the Alliant Energy Center. So
that's a lot.
There's more people coming out, more people excited, and there's basically a mini concert actually.
Oh yeah, who's playing?
Remy Wolf, who I've never heard of. The Nationals, who I've heard of once. Mumford and Sons, which I don't think I've ever heard a song from them before until then. Gracie Abrams, also have never heard of this person, but apparently everyone else had.
So okay, all right. Our set of lineup of people we haven't heard of, but the
I mean, in Milwaukee. Yeah, the crowd was excited about them, but in Milwaukee they have Cardi B, so it's like, come on, let's hit all the demographics everywhere.
What was the message here? Where is it the same? Was it like the same speech or something new?
Generally the same speech, but there was an emphasis on early voting, where she was encouraging people to, hey, vote now if you can. It's easier, it's more accessible.
Mm-hmm.
The lines aren't as long typically, but she also said, if someone hasn't voted early yet, or you haven't, make a plan, reach out to someone and try to get some information about where you can vote. Just go out and figure out how you can do it.
So this is a get out the vote kind of message.
Mostly, but if you're rallying, you're going to be talking about your opponent, which Donald Trump was in Green Bay, I think the day before.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Same day. Yeah.
It was earlier this week, yeah.
Yeah, they're both here in Wisconsin,
and that makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense in Madison, though, for Kamala Harris to be trying to drive turnout in blue Dane County rather than persuading anybody here in Madison.
Basically.
But you ran into some little trouble, I hear.
Yeah, trouble. So when you go to these rallies, there's designated press areas, which I think we've talked about before on other podcast episodes following rallies.
Hmm. Hmm.
But part of that is you want to get the best photos, so you're zipping back and forth between these places. And the staff were a little more prickly about it this time. Not all of them were stopping, but there's just this one guy, and he was going out of his way to stop me. I would go back and forth between the main risers, the side risers, and the little walkway. And he
Uh-huh.
would stop me. It's like, hey, you need to choose one place to be. I was like, why? No one else is. I don't understand what the issue is. But he kept doing it, and I wasn't listening to him because I'm doing what I'm supposed to do.
Right.
And eventually, he put his arm on me and manhandled me to push me in one place, and
Oh.
I kind of snapped on him a little bit, which was actually more controlled than it typically has been for when other people have manhandled me to not allude to anything too
Well, I
aggressive.
think, yeah, I think snapping at him is your least, like the least you could do.
I
Situation.
But I reached out to the campaign staff, and they called me about an hour after I reached out to them. We're like, hey, who's this person? I described him. I was like, oh, we think that's a new volunteer. Yeah, he definitely can't be putting his hands on you. I was like, yeah, I'm
You
saying,
think?
that's
So,
not,
but you're
that's
saying
the
that like
Secret Service's job.
other journalists and photographers were jumping between spots, and he was just targeting you?
Yeah,
Or-
it's what it looked like. I mean, I stopped to watch him a little bit and wasn't really stopping anyone else. So I don't know what I did to him. I don't think I've met him before. You see the same faces at these rallies most of the time, and I
Right.
don't, I make some off-color jokes, but I don't think I've said something too aggressive to get someone to hate me. I mean, the Secret Service didn't like the one joke I made one time. It was like, good thing I didn't leave a gun in my bag. But
Oh, yeah, you can't say
they
that.
still let me go to the rallies.
Yeah. So I wonder. Well, I'm sorry about that, Omar. And it's to be clear, like you're doing your job. You have the First Amendment right to do your job, and usually, um, campaigns they'll have some, for security and for just general flow of the event. They'll have some guidelines about how to how to do it, but nobody should be trying to stop you, and certainly not putting hands on you, which is really disappointing. And just I think people sometimes forget that Democrats and liberals can be kind of racist too, or not even kind of like straight up.
I mean, I didn't call it racism, but if the shoe fits and there's not very many Arab reporters at Kamala's rally, I'm usually the one, if not
Hmm.
the only one there.
Hmm.
So I feel it's targeted harassment and
I,
racism. But
I don't know how you would feel anything different because, like you said, what when you ask like, what did I do to him? I'm like, well, it's not what you did. It's kind of who you are, unfortunately, and I'm really sorry about that. And I hope the campaign expressed their contrition adequately.
they did apologize to
Good,
me profusely and thanked me for telling them.
good, good. All right. Well, thanks for covering it. You did end up getting some terrific photos, and those are up on the website now, as well as our Facebook, as well as all our social media feeds. So, uh, thanks a lot, Omar, and have a great weekend. All right, a couple things unrelated to the election. Rashad Taylor is a photographer who has been part of the Photo Midwest 13th Biennial Exhibition at the Arts and Lit Lab second floor mezzanine gallery. He's got a closing reception this weekend, Saturday night, and the exhibit, the collection that he has up is called Little Black Boy, and it features his own son in a number of really striking photographs. But our Rodlin May Banting, Rodlin from the podcast, has a Q&A with him up at madison365.org right now, and you still have a little time to try to catch that exhibit downtown Madison at the Arts and Lit Lab. Speaking of arts, November 16th is the 2024 Native Art Market. It's also at the Arts and Lit Lab, and it's going to be Saturday, November 16th, 10 to 6 p.m., 10 a.m., 6 p.m. A lot of these folks are folks you see at art fairs around, at indigenous art exhibits around, but they're very, very talented folks from across Wisconsin and across the United States. A lot of folks sort of do these art fairs on tour a little bit, and these are indigenous artists that it's funny because you think of indigenous artists and the immediate, for me anyway, like 50-year-old white man, you think of like a dream catcher or something, right? You think of like what we white people think of as quote unquote traditional. And a lot of them do that sort of work, but also they infuse those traditions and those techniques into work that's really contemporary, because these folks do not live in the past tense, right? These are modern contemporary people who just live here in Wisconsin or somewhere in the United States and are tremendously talented artists. So check that out. So again, November 16th at Arts and Lit Lab in Madison. All right, we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, Dr. Joe Gothard will be here. Okay, well, here's the question for you all. When you're ordering stuff online,
you can answer it too. For you all, I like how you like you all.
I'm curious to get everyone's perspective.
You got to answer it too.
I'll answer too.
Yeah. For
everybody around the table. What's the threshold? How much would you spend extra to get free shipping? if it says orders over $50,
how much is the shipping? If I bought $100 and it's $10 shipping, and I needed to spend, and I'm at $90, I will find a bracelet or some socks.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And that is just one small excerpt from the first episode of the Money Mindset podcast presented by Park Bank. As you can tell, we had a lot of fun, but we also talked about some serious stuff. This past episode, we talked about protecting your digital self. In future episodes, we're talking about credit. We're talking about what goes into lending decisions. We're talking about how to prepare your kids for a sound financial future. The Money Mindset podcast is in this very feed. Just scroll back one episode. You'll see that first Money Mindset podcast. Watch for that the next couple of Tuesdays. And thanks to Park Bank. Give it a listen, folks. And we're back, and joining us in the studio now, Dr. Joe Gothard, the Madison Metropolitan School District Superintendent. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing great today. Thank you for having me.
Great. Thanks for being here. Really appreciate your time. I know it's a busy job you have now, but let's talk about that job. You are a product of Madison Schools. You were a teacher and a principal here for a long time, and now you're back at the top of at the helm, right?
Right.
So how's your first school year starting out?
It's going great. I grew up here on the east side, attended Albion, Senate, La Follette schools, and worked for 20 years, various positions as an educational assistant at Lincoln Elementary, and left in 2013 as assistant superintendent of secondary schools. Mm-hmm. I started in Madison on May 20th. I came back early because I knew of the emergent work happening here, both for a referendum that I know we'll talk about in a bit, and wanted to firmly get my feet on the ground of a city I know and love, but also a city that I've been gone from for 11 years. I mean, there's a lot of new learning, a lot of new relationships, new board. And it was a major life decision to transition at this point and come back home. But I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, good. During that time, going from a student to working for the school district for so long, how did you see the district grow and change in that time? And then the second part of the question is, how has it changed and grown since you've been gone?
Yeah, it's amazing. I think back to, and I say this often when I'm talking with groups, that in 1970, I was born in 1971, just to put my age out there. Madison had 13% students of color in our district, and we now have 60%, 53 years later. And I think those are some of the changes that I certainly saw throughout my career with the, changing of our communities and embracing culture and race and language in so many different ways. I think it's only expanded what MMSD offers in terms of a global education and trying to bridge and build really strong communities, regardless of where one lives or goes to school. And I'm seeing evidence of that. As I come back and I hear and see and experience, what our students and what our families are. Doesn't mean we don't have work to do, but it's far different than it was, as a kindergarten student in '76 or a graduate in '89 or a principal in 2005
Right.
in the district.
The diversification of the district comes with some challenges, right? There's significant disparities in outcomes and stuff. What are the priorities in terms of addressing those disparities?
And there absolutely are disparities, and these aren't new.
Right.
We just now they're revealed. No Child Left Behind. One thing that I do think was really good about that is that for the first time, states are required in school districts to disaggregate data and understand the differences in how students are performing in our schools. Now, with that, of course, comes the real challenge. What are you going to do about it? And I think for me, it's become clear that we need to hear from our students. We need to hear from our families. We need to hear from our staff. A lot of times in systems, a decision is made that is done without that kind of relationship or engagement, or you show up once and fill out a survey and then never come back. And I think, if we want real change in this community in terms of what we expect our students to do and how we expect them to perform, it truly is about relationships and getting to know and trust and build efficacy together. It can't be just this one thing where you go to one class and it's taken care of. This is a long-range, long-term commitment that we have to our children in the city.
Other than that, and other than getting the referendum passed, which is we'll talk about in a minute, sort of looking ahead, what are your top priorities as leader of the district?
Yeah, well, let's park the referendum because that's required a lot of my time and attention, in these first several months. But I think coming in, I was just speaking with our principals this morning, and I shared with them that one of the advantages I have to coming back to Madison is that I have a mental model of what it was. When I left in 2013, I remember what that was, and that can be a big advantage. However, I have to also acknowledge that I've been gone for 11 years.
Yeah.
Lots of new faces, an entirely new board of education,
Right.
different laws that are now governing how schools are funded
Right.
in Wisconsin and in MMSD. So there's been a lot of new learning as well, which has been exciting for me, to learn to try to be the best leader that I can be for our school district. But my priorities were to, one, get our school year off to a strong start, and that requires being fully staffed. It's an area that Madison has struggled in the past several years following the pandemic. I'm really happy to report that we achieved many of those goals. I think we had 28 schools on day one that were fully staffed, which was a really big improvement from the past several years. We need to continue to do that. We need to continue to make sure that we have high quality licensed educators in front of our students each and every day. I think the second is to try to understand what are the strategic directions of MMSD and working with the Board of Education and Community to really put those to test. Are these, is our strategic framework still guiding our day-to-day operations, or do we need to come back and regroup around what our new reality is going to be moving forward? And I've made the decision with the support of the board that we are going to begin following the referendum some new strategic planning.
Okay.
As I've shared with folks, I really think we need to align our strategies with a sustainable future in mind. The funding has to be there for us to chart this path that isn't going to be interrupted by lack of funding or changes that we have to endure. So this has to be built strongly on the backs of this community with their engagement and input, but also the promises that we can do this long term. We're not going to right the wrongs or right the challenges that our scholars have had for decades, half a century, in 2, 3, 4 years. This has to be a long range commitment from me, from this community, from our board, from everyone in MMSD to make sure that we can get our students to a trajectory that is going to prepare them for a really successful life.
It occurs to me you're talking about preparing the way for kids who aren't even born yet.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
You're right. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
And I've thought about this recently with chronic absenteeism, something that comes up. Perhaps you've even talked about it previously. It's one of the, many believe, the outcrops of the pandemic. And as I think about high schools, we now have students in high school that weren't in high school during the pandemic. So it's truly a chance for us to, in many ways, have a true restart. That was a really hard time from 2020 on. I lived it like everyone did. And as much as we want to distance ourselves from some of the real challenges of that time, now I believe now is the time for us to truly do that, to really make this leap and say, this is the district we want to be. This is what we stand for our kids, and let's get to work.
You mentioned the staffing challenge being one of the kind of main things that you had to deal with right away. What's the core of that? Is it just lack of people who want to go into this profession? Is it a salary issue? Is it a benefits issue? What is there any one thing?
Yes, to all of those.
Okay.
But I think in our case, I think there's another one that may not be as visible to others. The federal government provided $200 billion with a B dollars to school districts around the country during the pandemic for relief efforts. For a number of things, from HVAC to extra teachers for reading to mental health supports. So education workforce as a whole expanded greatly during the last 3 years. Those monies expired in September of 2024. So now the educational workforce has contracted a little bit, has come back. And I do think that in some cases that there was just far fewer opportunities because of that funding, expired. And folks had to go back to, kind of the traditional roles that districts were offering. That's not to say that districts haven't continued some of the things that they funded during the pandemic, but there's just far fewer educational opportunities in most K-12 public school districts.
But you still had a hard time filling the jobs that were left?
Absolutely. And I think some of those some of the areas that were even challenging before the pandemic were in special education, staff who are bilingual. We have a growing EL and non-native English-speaking families and students that are enrolling, which is incredible. It's part of the diversity that really drew me to come back home and lead in our community. But with that, we need to make sure that we can provide the very best staff, for students and to be in service of our families and community as well.
How does and we're easing our way to talk about this referendum, but because one of the things that we're talking about is a salary increase for staff that was negotiated with MTI that may or may not happen depending upon the referendum. But with or without that raise, how does Madison school salaries compare to other districts around Dane County, other districts around the country?
I think, around Dane County, I think we're relatively in the same ballpark, and that's because we look at each other.
Sure.
And the challenge with that is, as soon as we put the stake in the ground and say this is our new salary, then districts around us are going to react to that, and they might try to up it, so that they can be the district that hires the most. So I think we're all relatively close. I think when you look around nationally, it'd be really hard to compare that. The economies in counties and cities and states are so different. I can tell you it's very, the average teacher salary here is very lower than it was in the Twin Cities metro. I can tell you that much. The numbers are quite stark in terms of the differences. Now, a lot of factors involved in that as well: cost of living, local context, the way that school districts are funded. So I understand that. And also, we often do not report benefits in that way as well. So you look at the total salary in terms of benefits. So you have to be very careful in making comparisons of what is included in that salary as well.
And just to put a number to this, like we're going to talk about the operating budget and asking for more money for the operating budget, and like over 80% of the operating budget is staff compensation, right? Which is, you don't have a whole lot of leeway.
Yeah, that's correct. And I think pretty common in public sector.
Yeah, for sure.
That salary and benefits make up the majority.
Right. So let's jump into this referenda, because this is a big question. It's going to be on the ballot on Tuesday. We talk all the time on this podcast about the importance of local elections. Like, come out, vote for president. That's great. But this is the kind of thing that's going to hit you on the ground, right? It's going to hit your kids and your schools and your property tax bill as well. Now, there are 3 referendums on the ballot. We're going to talk about 2 of them, because the other one's the city of Madison is asking for $22 million, which would amount to about $19 a month on the average property tax bill. But the school district has 2 referendums, one of which is, and I'm going to throw out some numbers, and you correct me if I got any of these wrong, but the first one is the operating budget referendum, which is asking for about $100 million over the next 4 years. That will add, according to some calculations, about $40 a year at first, but by 2028, it'll be like $1,000 a year to your property tax bill, to a couple $100 a month. The second and larger one is almost $500 million as a capital referendum for buildings and facilities and things like that. And that's over 23 years. So that's spread out over a much longer period of time. And that's going to be about $27 a month, $324 a year, but for a long period of time. So I understand that. Let's talk about the operating referendum first. I understand the school board actually passed two budgets, a just-in-case budget and a hopeful budget, right? So now, if the budget that was passed, assuming that the referendum does not pass, the pessimistic one, didn't actually have any significant cuts, except that the staff salary increase that was negotiated wouldn't be able to happen, and you'd have to take about almost $46 million out of the fund balance, right? Which is like you don't want to spend that, right? But there might be more cuts in the future, right? Can you talk about what does the school district look like if voters vote this thing down?
Yeah, well, that's a lot of information, and I would say that you're accurate. And some context to it.
Yeah,
so
please.
yes, we did pass the board did pass two budgets on Monday night, one with a passage of the referendum and one without. And you're right. In either case, this is important for people to understand. We have a structural deficit. So we are spending one-time funds to balance our budget for this school year.
Right.
So no cuts have been introduced because that budget is for this school year, not the future.
Got it.
Following Tuesday, we will begin working on our 25-26 budget. And even with the passage of a referendum, we are going to have to make some strategic decisions. There are going to be some expenditures that we are not able to continue because we cannot continue to deplete one-time funding in our fund balance.
Right.
Our fund balance policy is 10 to 15%. It's truly a source of revenue for us that's there for us to build. It's really designed for emergency use only.
Right.
There are times when we project spending more than we actually do, and that's how the fund balance builds up over time. So there might be a little bit of leeway in that. So that is not money that we can depend on in the future. We are asking our taxpayers to increase our ability to raise our revenue cap limits. These are state-imposed revenue limits that says even though the state is providing additional funds to school districts, it is not able to go to spendable revenue by the school district. In our case, the added money that the state is providing in state aid, because we're at our cap limit, will go to reduce property taxes. So I'll explain this to you in that last spring and over the summer, we were using $317 a year for that first year of the operating referendum at $30 million at 317. When we received the state aid announcement, that number was reduced to $40 per year because taxpayers are going to see a decrease of their taxes because that state aid doesn't come to the school district. It goes to the property taxes.
Got it.
We're at the revenue cap. We can't use that. We need a bigger glass.
Right.
That's what we're asking for. So we can fill it up with additional revenue for our operations.
Yeah.
In year 2, 3, and 4, though it's hard to project right now, we're going to stay with the numbers that we had. I think right now there's a trajectory that it's possible that we continue to get some additional aid that will be a lever to keep property taxes down. But we want to provide the information that we have right now. We can't predict what the future will hold. So we're showing, what the maximum would be. It's also important to point out that this provides the Board of Education the authority to raise revenue, the additional 30, 20, 20, and after 4 years, $100 million. It provides them the authority. It doesn't mean that it has to be spent. It provides the board the tools to keep the district operating in the manner in which we agree to. And there could be other factors that come in. The state could decide, we're going to fund special education at a higher rate, or we're going to increase the amount of inflationary per pupil formula aid that school districts get. Those would all be used to try to balance our reliance on our local property taxpayers. It is just astonishing for me to share that 90% of our revenue comes from our local property taxes. Those amounts are in the 20 percentages in the district I just left.
Really?
The state provides, the additional funding. So, we have a lot of work to do, both in advocacy, both in making sure that we can sustain our efforts. But that $100 million is essential to our core. We've already approved the 2.06% increase for our staff.
Yep.
There is another agreement that the staff will receive an additional 2.06 should the referendum pass. That was a $14 million investment, 7 in front and 7 following the results of the referendum.
Got it. Okay. So I want to put a pin in this number that you just said that I wasn't aware of. That almost your entire budget comes from property taxes, which is not the case in other states.
Correct.
Is that part of the problem here?
It absolutely is. I mean, the law was written, and it was right around the time I left, Act 10, and some of the other laws were very much written to limit the amount that districts were able to spend. And choice is a hot topic in our state and around the country. It's playing into national elections, and I think in some ways what it's done is it's restricted districts' abilities to do the great work that they set out to do, and it makes other options appealing. And it begins discourse that is around how can we disinvest in public schools and create other options. And I'm a believer in this. I have no problem if other options are really excellent for students. But when you create multiple systems and none of them are funded fully, one could argue that what are we doing for kids?
Right.
What are we truly doing for kids? That's been my argument about some choices the whole time. You can't fund either system fully. And then it becomes this argument. I'm pointing my fingers at each other, saying that it becomes a finger pointing game.
When you talk about other options, you're talking about kind of voucher schools,
vouchers, charters, absolutely.
Yep.
And MMSD we have a charter policy for instrumentality charter schools. The state does have independent charter schools as well. A little bit different environment here than perhaps Milwaukee, but nonetheless, one could argue that neither system is fully funded. And to me, that is it's truly a disservice to children. It really is.
Yeah. So, and I also want to just kind of reiterate and make sure I understand and our listeners understand that the referendum, it doesn't necessarily commit. You're not approving expenditures in the referendum. You're approving the option to increase expenditure, to increase revenue, and thus expenditures by a certain amount.
Provides the Board of Education, the school district, the authority to increase our revenue cap by by 100 million after 4 years.
Over 4 years.
Yes.
Right. So what, as you look at you're not looking yet ahead at the 25, 26, 26, 27 budgets and over those full 4 years, but you must have something in your mind like, okay, here's something we might have to lose next year or the year after. Do you have any thoughts, like anything specific you could say that we might have to actually reduce?
I don't know that I have specific in my mind. Now, we are going to have to sit down and engage as a community to understand, first of all, we need to start with what are our priorities.
Sure.
I don't want to go into it looking at we're going to cut, or we're going to do equal across the board. I want to make sure that what we have promised to ourselves, to our students, to our community, that we're able to deliver. From that, there are going to be some things that are identified that might be on the margins or efficiencies that we can look for that we're going to have to take serious consideration for. Present them to the community, present them to the Board of Education to see if that's the direction, that we want to go. So 2 very different outlooks, one with an additional 30 authority for an additional 30 and one without.
Right.
And that's a pretty stark difference.
Yeah. You mentioned that there's a structural deficit with or without this referendum,
Correct.
right? The referendum is not asking for us to get us into the black.
That's right.
That even if the referendum passes, you're going to have to take $22 million out of fund balance.
That's right.
As a one-time sort of stopgap.
That's right.
And then move forward. So that's the one. That's the $100 million operational budget over the next 4 years could increase your property taxes by as much as $27 a month. As much as about $40 a year, up to almost $1,000 a year through 2028. But that would change after those 4 years, right?
And those figures are for the average price home in Madison right now, $457,300.
Yep, right, exactly. Yeah, thank you for saying that. It's not $1,000 for everybody. It's like that's kind of average, and it might be more, it might be less.
Correct.
For you. Also, we should just kind of note, and this is not a question for you, but if you're renting, this is going to hit you too.
Yeah.
Like property taxes on your for the landlord get passed on to you. So just keep that in mind. The other referendum, the larger one that may have actually less impact immediately because it's over 23 years, is the capital referendum, which is buildings and facilities. Can you give us a little sense of what you need that for? What building projects that would fund?
Well, I'm grateful, and the community is grateful to the greater community for the referendum 2020, which allowed our 4 comprehensive high schools, Capital City High School and Southside Elementary, to be built with proceeds from that successful referendum. The transformation to our high school spaces is incredible. These are buildings that I know intimately well. La Follette, of course, I know much better as a
Right.
student, teacher, coach, principal there, but I know our other buildings as well. And I walk into those spaces, and what I enjoy doing is just watching others, enjoy those new spaces and be really proud of what this community has done to support us. So, in that plan, that's 6 of our 53 schools. So there is a facilities condition report that uses 14 different categories to rate the various components of each school's well-being, if you will.
Sure.
From their HVAC to their to electric, to everything there is about a facility. And based on the grades that they've received, we've prioritized the next 10 schools that are due to be replaced or be renovated. Some of these schools are over 60 years old. Some of them are still operating on boiler systems and heat systems that are far outdated. We don't even have parts in some cases to replace them. And I think the other thing that the community should understand is that, for building maintenance, there is no state funding designed for that. So these are general operating funds that we use for deferred maintenance. And for a district our size, we should be allocating far more than the $5 million a year that we have for a number of years to take care of deferred maintenance in our buildings.
That means just keeping up with when something breaks, fixing it.
100%. Or, the leaky roof gets repaired, or the potholes get filled, or the lights get exchanged. But it doesn't really allow us to get inside the school and dramatically change the learning environment for our students. And that's what this question is truly about. Yes, it's a big question. It's a big amount. But the transformation opportunity for what students can experience in those 10 schools in our community is historic. And it will make a difference for the next 50, 75, 100 years in those identified buildings.
And is there any concern about a split vote? Like somebody might vote yes on one, no on the other? Is that a concern? Is that something you're trying to communicate?
I think anytime you ask more than one question, there's always that opportunity. So I do think it is something you have to weigh. There are sometimes districts will ask questions and they'll have them contingent. So they'll say question 2 can only be passed if question 1 passes.
Oh, sure.
These are, while they're both really important, we don't see them as being linked in that way. So this is a little bit different. Facilities and general operating funds, both important.
Yeah. So you kind of alluded to this before, that Act 10 is really changed a lot. We know about the collective bargaining stuff, but and all the maps that got gerrymandered at the same time, which is slightly different, but around that same time, but then also the school funding changed. So one question I have on my notebook here is, how did we get in this mess? And it sounds like that's kind of it. Are you optimistic at all about changes in legislature that might be able to chip away at that school funding question and maybe help us out in the next 4 or 5 years?
I don't know. Optimistic might be the wrong word, because so much of my daily focus is on children. The lens of which I think is through the experiences of children in the city, in this community. We live in a city right now that is expected to grow by 100,000 people in the next 25 years. The best workforce I know of is right in our 53 buildings right now. These are children who we have the ability to reach and help them reach their full potential and think about careers they never thought they'd have. I'm living proof of this in this community. And we need to do a great job of that for this community to truly thrive. I don't want 100,000 added folks in this community if we're not taking care of our children. I think that would be a huge detriment to what we're trying to accomplish as a greater community.
Referendums aside, I want to get back to kind of a bigger picture question, and I appreciate you giving us a lot of time today. And I really appreciate it. But as a superintendent, how do you know, say 5 years from now, 10 years from now, how do you know you were successful as a superintendent?
It's a great question. I think a few things. One, obviously achievement. That is what everyone will look at. We've got a very rigid state reporting system, so it's not hard to find out how is the district doing. Though I'm not in every classroom teaching every single student, I'm responsible to
What do
the
you mean
board.
you're not in every classroom? What?
I'm responsible to the Board of Education to demonstrate progress for our students.
Sure.
It's a role that I take very seriously,
Uh-huh.
and it's really important. I think that's one piece. I think also making sure that there is a sustainable revenue budget, moving forward as well.
Yeah.
I want to get to a place where we can see the future and we're not worried about, are we going to be able to continue this, but we're able to invest in what our students need.
Yeah.
I've shared very boldly with people that I think enrollment is going to be really important for our district. You and listeners may have heard there's a birth shortage or birth decline around the country.
Yep.
However, we're a little bit different with the amount of people that want to be in Madison, Dane County, Greater Dane County. So this is a thriving destination community, and I want to help make MMSD a destination school district as well. We've been, 25,000 and with 4K, 27,000 for a long time. And I would like to ensure that we can be that first choice school district for folks that want to come to Madison or the Madison area.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to do this very strategically. Right now with our teams, I'm studying our enrollment patterns, as much information as we can. Our next phase will be to start to understand, what is it about our enrollment? What can we control? What's out of our control? How can we engage with our community so that we can truly capture as many students as possible that want to make Madison their school district community?
Wonderful. Dr. Gothard, thank you so much for being here today. I really appreciate your time. And folks, get out and vote if you haven't already. And I'll be up late Tuesday night, and we'll watch Madison365.org for the results. Thanks again, Dr. Gothard.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you again, Dr. Gothard, for sharing that and for making the case for the referendum. I can't tell you folks which way to vote. It's a big ask. It's a big, big ask they're making, especially on the operations side. If you vote no, if the operations referendum is defeated, they're not going to make any big cuts this year, but there will be cuts next year. And the fund balance will be depleted significantly. If you vote yes, that's $1,000 a year 4 years from now. That's a big, big ask. So I do not, full disclosure, I do not live in the city of Madison. I live out here in Mount Horeb, where we have our own referendum. But it's a tough call. It really is. So, but please do vote, whichever way you're feeling. Do vote. Now, the fact that you're still listening right now tells me that you care about what we do. You care about local news. You care about local journalism. You care about amplifying the voices of communities that are often not amplified and sometimes actively silenced. When we first started, almost 10 years ago now, I used to say that we're giving a voice to the voiceless. And within a year or two of starting, I realized that was wrong. That's the wrong way to think about it. We are not giving a voice to anybody. It's not that we have all the voices to give out. Right? Everybody has a voice. Everybody has a voice and has a story to tell. And it is our hope and our mission to amplify those voices. Now, there are a lot of people in this community, not most people really appreciate us and are glad we're here. But there's a not insignificant number of people, many people in power or many people with privilege, who kind of would rather we go back to that time when everything was colorblind, right? Where we didn't see color, in quote unquote, don't see color. Or to a time when we just didn't have to think about or talk about race and racial justice. The past was better. It's usually a white person because it was better for us, and we didn't talk about the ways that it could improve. And now we're talking about it. And Madison 365 is pushing those conversations, which we knew from the very beginning would be uncomfortable. So yeah, we make people uncomfortable. That's why a lot of people wouldn't mind if we just kind of faded away. But you can help us stop that from happening. Right? In order to keep going, and to keep this podcast on the air, quote unquote air, not really air, but to keep this podcast coming into your earbuds, to keep the journalism happening at Madison365.org, to keep all the social media posts happening, to keep your email newsletters coming every weekend, we need some buy-in from you. And we're never charged for this stuff. We decided early on, we're going to be the news for and by the sort of community people, not just the people who could pay for it, right? We're always going to be free for everyone. If you can spare a couple of dollars, though, to help us do that, help us keep it free for everyone, please do. And now's the time to do it, because here's why. It's Newsmatch time. There's a consortium of funders who give the Institute for Nonprofit News a pile of money and say, split this among your newsrooms, the member newsrooms. And there's also some additional challenge grants. Basically, anything you give us now until the end of the year is tripled. All right, so you give us $5, we get 15. You give us 20, we get 60. You give us 100, we get 300. And the best part, I think this is the best part. If you sign up for a monthly donation, Newsmatch will match not just this month and next month, they'll match the entire year. All right, so let's say you go on Madison365.org/donate, and you say, I'm going to give you $20 a month. That comes out to $240 for the year. That means Newsmatch will give us an additional $480 right now. Or when this is all done in January. They'll give us an additional $480 on top of the $240 you're going to give us over the course of the year. This stuff is important. Local news is important. Local news highlighting people who haven't been highlighted before, more important. So please do consider making a donation. Go to Madison365.org/donate or click the link in the show notes. We really, really do appreciate it. All right, that's all we have for you this week. Watch your social media feeds for more Madison 365 stories. Watch Madison365.org/election on Tuesday night. I'll be up late. I'll be watching, but you can watch too at Madison365.org/election. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, wherever you find your news. We'll be there.